They said she was too young, too inexperienced, too soft for children who had made 17 nannies quit in 8 months. But Julia Hayes didn't see 3 spoiled billionaire kids when she walked into that mansion. She saw 3 hearts nobody had bothered to understand, and when those triplets whispered that one word she never expected to hear, everything changed. For all of them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Julia Hayes had exactly $47 in her checking account when her landlord slipped the eviction notice under her apartment door. She sat on the worn carpet of her studio in Queens, the paper trembling in her hands, and felt the familiar weight of failure settle on her shoulders. 23 years old, a college dropout, working 3 part-time jobs that barely covered rent in one of the cheapest buildings in the borough. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "You'll never amount to anything if you keep running from commitment, Julia." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd left Princeton after 2 years, unable to stomach another semester of her stepfather's disappointed phone calls and her mother's pointed questions about why she couldn't just be more like her older sister, Caroline. Caroline the lawyer. Caroline the perfect daughter. Caroline, who never colored outside the lines or dreamed of anything beyond the approved path. Julia had left because she felt suffocated by expectations, by the pressure to become someone she wasn't. But freedom, she'd discovered, came with its own price tag. She glanced at her phone. 6 missed calls from her mother. She couldn't face that conversation right now, the inevitable "I told you so" wrapped in false concern. Instead, she pulled on her coat and headed to her evening shift at Moretti's, the family-owned Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village, where she waited tables 4 nights a week. The November air bit at her cheeks as she emerged from the subway. New York City glittered around her, indifferent to her struggles. Tourists laughed and took selfies in Washington Square Park. Couples strolled hand in hand toward cozy restaurants she couldn't afford. Everyone seemed to have figured out their place in this massive, churning city, except her. "You're late," Marco Moretti said when she pushed through the restaurant's door, but his tone was gentle. He was in his 60s, with kind eyes and flour perpetually dusting his apron. He'd given her this job 8 months ago when she'd walked in, desperate and honest about her lack of experience. "I'm sorry, Marco, it won't happen again." He studied her face with the perception of someone who'd raised 4 daughters. "You look like you're carrying the world, Piccola." "Everything okay?" Julia forced a smile. "Just tired." He didn't believe her, she could tell, but he didn't push. That was what she appreciated about Marco. He gave her space to breathe, to exist without judgment. The restaurant became her sanctuary over the past months, the only place where she felt competent, useful. The dinner rush consumed her attention for the next 4 hours. She took orders, delivered steaming plates of carbonara and osso buco, refilled wine glasses, smiled at customers who sometimes remembered to say thank you. Her feet ached in her cheap work shoes, but the rhythm of service quieted her anxious mind. It was nearly 10 when she noticed the woman sitting alone at table 12. She was probably in her late 50s, elegantly dressed in a charcoal wool coat, her silver hair cut in a precise bob. But it was her eyes that caught Julia's attention, sharp, observant, missing nothing. She'd been nursing a single glass of Chianti for over an hour, barely touching the margarita pizza she'd ordered. "Can I get you anything else?" Julia asked, approaching with the check. The woman looked up, and Julia felt an odd sensation, as if she were being assessed, measured against some invisible standard. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you. Do you have a moment?" Julia glanced around the restaurant. The dinner crowd had thinned to a few lingering tables. "I suppose so. Is something wrong with your meal?" "The food is excellent." The woman gestured to the seat across from her. "Please sit. My name is Margaret Chen. I realize this is unconventional, but I've been watching you work tonight." A dozen alarm bells rang in Julia's head, but curiosity won out. She sat, perched on the edge of the chair. "Okay, you're very good with people," Margaret said. "Patient, attentive. You noticed when the elderly gentleman at table 4 needed his water refilled before he had to ask. You calmed down that crying toddler with a simple origami napkin swan. You have a natural warmth that can't be taught. Julia's cheeks flushed. Thank you, but I'm looking for someone to help with my employer's children, Margaret interrupted smoothly. 3 7-year-old triplets. It's a challenging position. The family is complicated, but I think you might be exactly what they need. I'm not a nanny, Julia said immediately. I don't have any qualifications or... The last 17 qualified nannies quit, Margaret said flatly. Credentials clearly aren't the answer. These children don't need someone with a degree in child development. They need someone who actually sees them as human beings. 17 nannies. The number hung in the air between them, like a red flag the size of Texas. What happened to them? Julia asked. The nannies, I mean. Margaret's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. The children are resistant to authority. They've developed rather creative ways of expressing their displeasure with caretakers. Nothing dangerous, she added quickly, seeing Julia's expression, but effective at ensuring people don't stay long. And you think I could handle kids who've run off 17 trained professionals? I think you have nothing to lose by interviewing. Margaret slid a business card across the table. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. Margaret Chen, estate manager, Westbrook Residence. An address in the Upper East Side that made Julia's eyebrows rise. That was serious money territory. The position pays $75,000 annually, plus room and board if you choose to live on site. Full benefits, 2 days off per week. Julia's heart stuttered. $75,000. She currently made about $28,000 cobbling together her 3 jobs. That kind of money would change everything. She could go back to school if she wanted, save, breathe. Why me? She asked. You don't know anything about me. I know you've worked here for 8 months without a single complaint. I know Marco Moretti, a man who doesn't trust easily, speaks of you like family. I know you're kind to strangers, and children respond to you naturally. And I know you need this opportunity as much as those children need someone who won't give up on them. The eviction notice flashed through Julia's mind. $47. Her mother's disappointment. The crushing weight of barely surviving in a city that chewed up dreamers and spit them out. What's the catch? Julia asked. The children's father is distant, preoccupied with his work. Their mother passed away 2 years ago, and they haven't processed that loss in healthy ways. They're angry, hurt, and they've learned that pushing people away is safer than letting anyone close. You'd be walking into an emotional minefield, and the father is okay with hiring someone with 0 childcare experience. Margaret's expression shifted, became almost conspiratorial. Mr. Westbrook has given me full authority over household staffing decisions. He's too busy running his empire to concern himself with the details. As long as someone is watching the children, he doesn't particularly care about their credentials. That should have bothered Julia more than it did. What kind of father was so checked out that he didn't even interview the people caring for his kids? But she'd grown up with a stepfather who'd been physically present but emotionally absent, and she knew that wealth didn't guarantee love or attention. I'd like you to come for an interview tomorrow, Margaret said. 2:00. Meet the children, see the house, decide if it's something you want to pursue. No commitment required. Julia picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed letters. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. Children who terrorized 17 nannies. A father who didn't care enough to be involved. A mysterious woman recruiting strangers from Italian restaurants. But the irrational part, the part that had made her leave Princeton, that had kept her in New York, despite every difficulty, whispered something different. This was a door opening when all the others had slammed shut. This was possibility. I'll be there, Julia heard herself say. Margaret smiled, a real smile this time, warm and approving. Excellent. I'll see you tomorrow, Ms. Hayes. And Julia? She stood, laying cash on the table for her bill. Don't wear anything you'd be upset about getting ruined. The triplets can be messy. After Margaret left, Julia sat at the empty table for a long moment, staring at the business card. Marco appeared beside her, refilling her water glass without being asked. "That woman," he said, "she has the look of someone who changes lives. For better or worse, I can't say. But she chose you for a reason, Piccola." Julia looked up at him. "What if I'm not ready? What if I mess this up like I've messed up everything else?" Marco's eyes crinkled with affection. "The only way you could mess this up is by not trying. You have a good heart. Trust it." That night, Julia lay awake in her cramped studio, watching headlights sweep across her ceiling. In less than 16 hours, she'd walk into a world completely foreign to her. A billionaire's mansion, 3 traumatized children, a life that existed in a stratosphere she'd never imagined entering. She thought about her mother, about Caroline, about every person who'd ever looked at her and seen someone who couldn't follow through. Maybe they were right. Maybe she'd walk into that interview and run like the 17 nannies before her. Or maybe this was the moment everything changed. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Margaret Chen. "I'll be there at 2 p.m. Thank you for the opportunity." The response came within seconds. "The opportunity is theirs, Julia. You'll understand tomorrow." Julia set her phone aside and closed her eyes, her heart beating with equal parts terror and hope. She didn't know it yet, but in less than 24 hours, 3 7-year-old children would look at her with eyes full of tests and walls and pain, and she'd make a choice that would transform all their lives. She was walking into chaos. But sometimes chaos was exactly where broken things learned to heal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Westbrook mansion wasn't just a house. It was a statement of power that made Julia's stomach clench the moment the taxi pulled up to the iron gates. She'd taken the subway as far as she could, then splurged on a cab for the final stretch through the Upper East Side, watching the buildings grow taller and more imposing with each block. But nothing had prepared her for this. A 5-story limestone fortress that occupied an entire corner, its windows gleaming like watchful eyes, perfectly manicured hedges creating geometric patterns in the front courtyard. Julia pressed the intercom button with a trembling finger. "Ms. Hayes." "Right on time," Margaret's voice crackled through the speaker, and the gates swung open with a mechanical whisper that probably cost more than Julia's annual rent. The front door opened before she could knock. Margaret stood there in a crisp navy suit, her expression unreadable. "Come in. The children are in the playroom." "I thought it best if you met them immediately, without too much preamble." "Shouldn't I meet Mr. Westbrook first?" Julia asked, stepping into a foyer that could have housed her entire studio apartment. Marble floors, a crystal chandelier that threw rainbow fragments across cream-colored walls, a staircase that curved upward like something from a movie. "Mr. Westbrook is in Singapore, or possibly Tokyo. His schedule changes." Margaret's tone suggested this was completely normal. "He won't be back for another week. As I mentioned, staffing decisions are my responsibility." They walked through hallways lined with artwork that Julia recognized from her brief stint in an art history course. A Rothko, what might have been a genuine Picasso sketch, photographs by someone famous whose name she couldn't recall. Everything whispered wealth so profound it had stopped screaming. "Before we go in," Margaret said, pausing outside a set of double doors, "you should know that the Triplets have developed a system. They test every new caretaker within the first hour. It's always different, always designed to exploit whoever's weaknesses they've identified. The last nanny lasted 45 minutes before she walked out covered in poster paint, crying about the violation of her professional dignity." "What did they do?" "Told her they wanted to make her a welcome banner. She spent 30 minutes helping them create it. Then they dumped the remaining paint over her head and told her the banner said, 'Go away,' in letters she couldn't read because she'd had her back turned." Julia's eyes widened. "That's calculated, deliberate, designed to hurt." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "They're not cruel children, Julia. They're children who've been taught that everyone leaves, so they've decided to control the leaving. It's a defense mechanism. How long since their mother died? 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Not that anyone here marks the date, except the children. There was something bitter in Margaret's voice, quickly suppressed. Are you ready? Julia wasn't, but she nodded anyway. The playroom was chaos incarnate. Toys covered every surface, building blocks scattered like casualties across an expensive rug. Stuffed animals arranged in what looked like battle formations. Art supplies spilling from overturned containers. But what struck Julia wasn't the mess. It was the silence. 3 identical 7-year-old children sat in different corners of the room, each completely isolated from the others, each focused on separate activities with an intensity that felt deliberately performative. They had their father's dark hair. She could see a family portrait on the wall, a beautiful woman with kind eyes standing next to a stern-looking man. 3 toddlers in matching outfits. Before, when they'd been a family. Children, Margaret said, her voice firm but not unkind. This is Julia Hayes. She's here to meet you. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her simultaneously. It was unnerving, like being examined by a single consciousness split into 3 bodies. The boy closest to the window spoke first. You're younger than the last one. How old are you, 20? 23, Julia said, still practically a teenager. This came from the girl building an elaborate structure from magnetic tiles, her tone dismissive. Did you even finish college? Julia felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to stay calm. No, I didn't. I left after 2 years. A dropout. The 3rd child, another girl, looked up from her sketchbook with something almost like satisfaction. So you're a quitter. That's perfect. You'll fit right in with all the others who quit on us. Margaret cleared her throat. This is Ethan, she gestured to the boy by the window. Lily, the girl with the magnetic tiles. And Sophie, the one with the sketchbook. Children, I expect you to show Miss Hayes basic courtesy. We're always courteous, Ethan said, his voice dripping with false innocence. Right until the moment we're not. Julia studied them, really looked. Beneath the hostility, she saw exhaustion in Lily's posture, the way her shoulders hunched slightly forward, as if carrying invisible weight. Sophie's fingers gripped her pencil so tightly her knuckles had gone white. And Ethan, for all his bravado, sat with his back pressed against the wall, positioned so he could see both doors, a child who needed to know his exits. These weren't monsters. They were terrified kids wearing armor. Margaret, Julia said quietly, could you give us a few minutes alone? Margaret's eyebrows rose. Are you certain? Yes, very well. I'll be right outside if you need me. She left, closing the doors with a soft click. The triplets exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Then Ethan smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. So, what makes you think you're special? What makes you think you can last where 17 others failed? I don't think I'm special, Julia said honestly. She moved to the center of the room and sat down on the floor, cross-legged, making herself smaller, less threatening. And I don't know if I can last, but I'm curious about something. What? Sophie asked, suspicion evident in every line of her body. Why 17? Why that specific number? Did you have a goal you were trying to reach, or did it just work out that way? The question clearly caught them off guard. Lily's hands stilled on her magnetic tiles. Ethan's smirk faltered slightly. We didn't count them, Lily finally said. But the grown-ups did. They're obsessed with keeping track of their failures. That must get boring, Julia observed. Running off nanny after nanny. Don't you ever want to try something different? Like what? Ethan challenged. Let some stranger pretend to care about us. Let them act like they want to be here when everyone knows they're just collecting a paycheck. I need the paycheck, Julia admitted. I'm about to be evicted from my apartment. I'm barely surviving in this city. Margaret offered me this job, and I took it because I'm desperate. So no, I'm not going to pretend I'm here purely out of the goodness of my heart. The honesty seemed to surprise them more than anything else could have. Sophie set down her pencil. At least you're not lying about it. I don't see the point in lying. You'd figure it out anyway. You're clearly smart enough to see through adults' bullshit. Julia used the curse word deliberately, testing the waters. But here's what I'm actually curious about. What would it take for someone to stay? Not because they're too stubborn to quit, but because you actually wanted them here. That's impossible, Lily said flatly. Nobody wants to be here. This house is like a museum. Everything's expensive and breakable, and we're not supposed to touch anything or be too loud or exist too much. Your dad is never here, Ethan cut her off. He's always somewhere else, somewhere more important. We're just items on his staff's to-do list. Make sure the children are fed, clothed, and not dead. Check. The bitterness in his voice was too adult, too knowing for a 7-year-old. Julia's heart cracked a little. That sounds really lonely, she said softly. We're not lonely, Sophie said quickly, defensively. We have each other. Do you? Julia looked at the 3 separate corners, the deliberate distance between them. Or are you all just lonely together? The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more honest. What do you want from us? Lily asked finally, and beneath the hostility was something else. Something that sounded almost like hope, quickly buried. I want to know what you need, Julia said. Not what the nannies thought you needed, or what your dad thinks you need, or what some parenting manual says you need. What do you actually need? We need people to leave us alone, Ethan said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. Okay, I can do that. Julia stood up, brushing off her jeans. I'll tell Margaret this isn't going to work out. You 3 clearly have your system, and I'd just be in the way. She walked toward the door, hand on the handle, waiting, and counting silently. 1, 2, 3, wait! It was Sophie who spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Julia turned. The little girl was standing now, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. You're really just going to leave? Just like that? You're not even going to try to convince us you're different? You told me what you need, Julia said gently. To be left alone. I'm respecting that. But you asked what we need, Lily said, standing as well. You didn't ask what we want. Julia's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. What do you want? The triplets looked at each other, that silent communication flowing between them again. Then Ethan stood, completing the triangle, and spoke for all of them. We want to know if you'll stay when we're terrible. We want to know if you'll stay when we test you and push you and try to make you leave. We want to know if you're capable of not giving up on us. The vulnerability in his voice, quickly masked by defiance, nearly broke her. I can't promise I won't mess up, Julia said. I can't promise I'll always know what to do, but I can promise that if I leave, it won't be because you weren't worth staying for. It'll only be because I genuinely couldn't handle the job. And I'll tell you that to your faces, not sneak out while you're sleeping like I'm ashamed. The last nanny did that, Lily said quietly. Number 16. She left in the middle of the night. We woke up and she was just gone. Julia knelt down, making herself eye level with them. That was cruel. You deserved better than that, so you'll stay, Sophie asked. You'll actually try? I'll try, Julia said. But I need you to try too. Deal? She held out her hand. The triplets looked at it, at each other, at her face, searching for deception or false promises. Then Ethan stepped forward and shook her hand. Deal, but don't say we didn't warn you when you regret this. Lily and Sophie followed, their small hands gripping hers with surprising strength. Julia smiled. I'll take my chances. She had no idea that in the next 24 hours, those chances would be tested in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. But in that moment, standing in a playroom with 3 broken children who'd just decided to let her try, Julia Hayes felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Julia moved into the Westbrook mansion on a grey Saturday morning with everything she owned fitting into 2 battered suitcases and a backpack. Margaret met her at the service entrance. Less conspicuous, she'd explained, and led her up a narrow back staircase that the family probably never used. Her room was on the 3rd floor, tucked into what had once been servants' quarters. It was smaller than the playroom, but larger than her entire studio apartment had been, with an actual window that overlooked a small garden she hadn't known existed behind the mansion's imposing facade. You'll take meals with the children, Margaret said, setting a folder on the antique dresser. Their schedule is in here. Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Mr. Westbrook dines separately when he's home, which is rare. The children attend Ashford Academy. A car service picks them up at 7:45 and returns them at 3:30. What do I do while they're at school? Julia asked. Whatever you'd like, within reason. Your responsibility is the children's well-being outside of school hours. How you structure that time is entirely up to you. Margaret paused at the door. One more thing. The previous nannies tried to impose rigid routines, strict discipline, various reward systems. None of it worked. The children have been parented by theories and strategies instead of people. Maybe try just being human with them. After Margaret left, Julia sat on the edge of the bed, a real bed with a thick mattress and crisp white sheets, and let herself absorb the surreal reality. 3 days ago, she'd been facing eviction. Now she was living in a mansion, responsible for 3 children who chewed through 17 caregivers like they were disposable. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. Again. Julia had been avoiding the calls, but she couldn't put it off forever. She answered. Julia Marie Hayes, do you have any idea how worried I've been? Her mother's voice was sharp, with that particular blend of concern and criticism she'd perfected over the years. You haven't answered my calls in 4 days. I'm sorry, Mom. Things have been hectic. I got a new job, another waitressing position. Julia, when are you going to take your future seriously? I'm a nanny now. For a family in the Upper East Side. It pays $75,000 a year with room and board. The silence on the other end was profound. Then, a nanny? Julia, you don't know anything about children. I'm learning. Julia kept her voice steady, refusing to let the doubt creep in. It's a good opportunity. Who are these people? What kind of family hires someone with no experience to watch their children? A family that needs help. Look, I have to go. I start today and I need to prepare. Julia, wait. But she'd already hung up, heart pounding. She'd spent her whole life listening to why she wasn't enough, wasn't ready, wasn't capable. Maybe her mother was right. But maybe for once she was wrong. A knock on her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She opened it to find all 3 triplets standing there. Still in their pajamas, despite it being nearly 9 in the morning. We have a proposition, Ethan announced, pushing past her into the room without invitation. Lily and Sophie followed, their eyes scanning her sparse belongings with undisguised curiosity. Good morning to you too, Julia said dryly. We've been talking, Lily said, picking up the framed photo Julia had set on the nightstand. Her and Marco from the restaurant's anniversary party, both of them laughing at something off-camera. And we've decided that if you're really going to try with us, we need to establish some ground rules. Julia crossed her arms, intrigued despite herself. I'm listening. Sophie pulled a folded piece of paper from her pajama pocket and unfolded it with ceremony. Rule 1, no lying ever, even when the truth is uncomfortable. We've had too many people tell us pretty lies. Rule 2, Ethan continued, no leaving without saying goodbye, even if you're just going to the store. We need to know where you are. Rule 3, Lily added, her voice softer, no pretending you're our mother. You're not. You'll never be. Don't try to replace her. The last rule hit Julia square in the chest. She sat down on the bed, gesturing for them to sit too. They perched on the edge, a careful distance away, watching her. Those are fair rules, Julia said carefully. But I have some too. 3 pairs of identical eyes narrowed suspiciously. Rule 1, no deliberately destroying my things. You can test me, challenge me, even yell at me. But my belongings are off limits. I don't have much, and I need what I have. That's reasonable, Sophie conceded. Rule 2, if you're upset with me, tell me. Use words. Don't make me guess what I did wrong, or wait for some elaborate revenge plot. I'm not a mind reader, but the revenge plots are the fun part, Ethan muttered, though there was a hint of a smile. And Rule 3, Julia took a breath. Give me a real chance. Not a test designed for me to fail, but an actual opportunity to figure this out. I've never done this before. I'm going to mess up. When I do, Help me understand what I should do differently." The triplets exchanged glances, that silent communication flowing between them. "Okay," Lily said finally. "We can agree to those terms. But we're keeping track. 3 strikes and you're out. What constitutes a strike?" "We'll know it when we see it," Ethan said ominously. Julia laughed despite herself. "You 3 are terrifying, you know that?" "We've been told," Sophie said, but she was almost smiling too. "So what now?" Julia asked. "What do you usually do on Saturday mornings?" The triplets looked at each other, then back at her with identical expressions of confusion. "Nobody's ever asked us that before," Lily said. "The nannies always had activities planned," Ethan explained. "Educational games, museum trips, structured playtime. Everything was always scheduled. Did you like those things?" "We sabotaged them," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "Every single one." Julia considered this. "What would you do if you could do anything? If there were no nannies, no schedules, no adults telling you what's good for you?" The question hung in the air. The triplets looked genuinely stumped. "We'd probably just watch TV," Ethan admitted. "The stuff we're not supposed to watch. Or eat junk food for breakfast," Lily added. "Or stay in our pajamas all day," Sophie finished. "Done," Julia said, standing up. "Let's raid the kitchen, find the most nutritionally void cereal we can, and have a lazy morning. No structure, no educational value. Just existing." "Seriously?" Ethan looked suspicious. "What's the catch?" "No catch. It's Saturday." "You're kids." "I'm exhausted from moving. Let's just be humans together and see what happens." 20 minutes later, they were all sprawled in the media room, a space the size of Julia's former apartment with a screen that belonged in an actual movie, in theater, eating Lucky Charms straight from the box and watching cartoons that were definitely too mature for 7-year-olds. Julia sat on one end of the massive sectional sofa. The triplets had initially clustered at the other end, maintaining their distance. But gradually, as the morning wore on, they migrated closer. First Sophie, then Lily, then finally Ethan, until they were all sharing the same section of couch, passing the cereal box back and forth. "This is weird," Lily announced during a commercial break. "Bad weird or good weird?" Julia asked. "Just weird. We've never just hung out with a nanny before. They were always trying to improve us or teach us something." "Maybe you don't need improving," Julia said. "Maybe you just need someone to sit with you while you eat terrible cereal and watch mindless TV." "The last nanny said television rots your brain," Ethan said. "The last nanny quit after 45 minutes. So maybe her opinions aren't that reliable," Julia pointed out. Sophie giggled, an actual, genuine giggle that transformed her whole face. "That's true. She did cry a lot. Why do you do it?" Julia asked, keeping her tone casual. "The tests, the pranks, the driving people away. What are you hoping will happen?" The laughter died. The triplets went quiet. "We're trying to find someone who stays," Lily finally said, so softly Julia almost missed it. "Everyone says they will, and then they don't. So we figure if we show them the worst of us right away, and they still stay, then maybe they mean it." "But nobody's ever stayed," Sophie added. "So we just keep proving that we're right. That everyone leaves eventually." Julia's throat tightened. "What if I told you that I'm not everyone? What if I told you I'm just as scared as you are?" "Scared of what?" Ethan challenged. "Of failing. Of letting you down. Of being another person who couldn't handle it and had to leave. But also scared of not trying at all and always wondering what if." "So you're saying you might fail," Ethan said slowly. "You might be another quitter. I'm saying I'm human. I have limits. But I'm also saying that my limits are about me, not about you. If I can't handle this job, it's because of my own issues. Not because there's something wrong with you 3. All the other nannies made it seem like we were the problem," Lily said. "You're not the problem. You're kids who've been through something terrible and are doing your best to survive it. That's not wrong. It's just hard." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Ethan shifted closer, just an inch, and leaned his head against Julia's shoulder. It was the first time any of them had voluntarily touched her. "Okay," he whispered. "You can stay. For now." Lily and Sophie followed, curling up on either side of her like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Julia sat very still, afraid to breathe too deeply and break the spell. 3 small bodies pressed against hers, trusting her despite every reason not to. On the screen, cartoon characters fought ridiculous battles. The cereal box lay empty between them. Outside, the grey morning had given way to weak winter sunshine. This was her commitment. Not to be perfect, not to have all the answers, but to show up, to be present, to stay when staying got hard. She didn't know about the crisis coming in 3 days. She didn't know about the test that would nearly break all of them. She didn't know about the moment when these 3 children would look at her and see something they'd lost 2 years ago. But she knew this. She wasn't running. Not today. Not yet, and maybe that was enough to start. The first real test came on Monday afternoon, when the triplets returned from school. Julia was in the kitchen attempting to figure out how the 6-burner professional stove worked, when she heard the front door slam with enough force to rattle the chandelier in the foyer. Moments later, 3 separate sets of footsteps pounded up the main staircase, followed by 3 separate bedroom doors slamming in quick succession. She found Margaret in the hallway, looking unsurprised. "What happened?" Julia asked. "Parent-teacher conferences are next week. The school sent home progress reports." Margaret handed her 3 sealed envelopes, each embossed with the Ashford Academy crest. "The children don't handle academic criticism well." Julia climbed the stairs to the children's wing, a section of the 3rd floor she'd barely explored. 3 doors, each with a name plaque in elegant script. She knocked on Ethan's first. "Go away!" "It's Julia." Silence. Then quieter. "Still go away." She tried the handle, locked. "Ethan, I have your progress report. I haven't opened it. I wanted to look at it with you. I don't care what it says. The teachers don't like us anyway." Julia slid down to sit with her back against his door. "Why don't they like you?" "Because we ask too many questions. Because we don't just accept what they say. Because we're not quiet and obedient like the other kids whose parents actually show up to things." The pain in his voice made Julia's chest ache. "Your dad doesn't go to school events? He's too busy saving the world or making billions or whatever. He sends Margaret with a checkbook. It's great for the school's fundraisers. Not so great for us." Julia opened the envelope, scanning the report. Ethan's grades were actually excellent, straight A's in every subject. But the comments told a different story. Argumentative in class discussions, challenges teacher authority, bright but disruptive. "Ethan, your grades are amazing. You're clearly brilliant. Then why does every report say I'm a problem?" "Because teachers sometimes mistake independent thinking for disrespect. And because it's easier to label a kid as difficult than to wonder why they're acting out." Julia kept her voice gentle. "But none of these comments say you're not smart enough or capable enough. They just say you don't fit their narrow idea of how students should behave." The lock clicked. The door opened a crack, and Ethan peered out, his eyes red-rimmed. "You really think I'm brilliant?" "I think you're a kid who asks questions because you actually want to understand things, not just memorize them. That's not a flaw. That's exactly how you're supposed to learn." He opened the door wider. "The other nannies always took the teacher's side. They said I needed to be more respectful, more compliant. I'm not the other nannies." Julia stood, brushing off her jeans. "Come on, let's go see what your sister's reports say." Lily's door was unlocked. She sat at her desk, the progress report torn into tiny pieces, scattered across the surface like confetti. "I'm not talking about it," she said, before Julia could speak. Julia picked up one of the pieces. The fragment read, "Work is sloppy and incomplete. Lily seems distracted, and what subject is this?" Julia asked. "All of them." Lily's voice was hollow. "I'm failing everything. I'm stupid, and I can't focus, and I forget things, and I'm just broken." Julia pulled up a chair beside her. "Can I tell you something? When I was at Princeton, I failed an entire semester. Not because I was stupid, but because I couldn't concentrate. My mind was always somewhere else. Turns out I wasn't broken. I was just trying to learn in a way that didn't work for my brain." "What do you mean?" "I need to move when I learn. I need to write things down by hand, not type them. I need music playing in the background because silence makes me anxious. Everyone learns differently, Lily. Maybe we just need to figure out how your brain works best. My teachers say I need to try harder. Pay better attention. Your teachers are wrong. Julia said it firmly, without hesitation. Trying harder at something that doesn't work just makes you more frustrated. We need to try differently. A spark of something, hope maybe, flickered in Lily's eyes. You think there's a way I could actually be good at school? I think you're already good at a million things. We just need to find the path that makes sense for you. Sophie's room was the hardest. She sat on her bed perfectly still, the progress report clutched in her hands, tears streaming silently down her face. Sophie. Julia approached carefully. Can I sit with you? A tiny nod. Julia sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. Finally, Sophie handed her the report without a word. The grades were mixed, some A's, some C's, but the comments made Julia's blood boil. Sophie is too quiet in class. She needs to participate more in group discussions, recommend evaluation for social anxiety disorder. They think there's something wrong with me, Sophie whispered. Because I don't talk as much as the other kids. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you, Julia said fiercely. Being quiet doesn't mean you're anxious or broken. It means you're thoughtful. It means you listen before you speak. That's a strength, not a weakness. But the teachers want me to be different, louder, more outgoing. The teachers want you to be convenient. But you don't exist to make their jobs easier. You exist to be exactly who you are. Julia put her arm around Sophie's small shoulders. And who you are is pretty wonderful. Sophie leaned into her, still crying, but the tension in her body began to ease. I miss my mom. She understood. She never made me feel weird for being quiet. There it was, the wound beneath everything else. Julia held her closer. Tell me about her. What was she like? Piston. She was gentle, and she always smelled like lavender. And she used to read to us every night, doing all the different character voices. Sophie's voice caught. Dad threw away all her books. He said they were just taking up space. But they weren't. They were pieces of her. Julia felt rage toward a man she'd never met. That must have hurt so much. He throws away everything that reminds him of her. Like if he erases her from the house, he won't have to feel sad anymore. But we still remember. We can't just forget her. You shouldn't forget her. She's your mom. She'll always be your mom. That evening, Julia gathered all 3 children in the playroom. She'd spent an hour on her laptop researching learning strategies, accommodation options, and how to advocate for kids who didn't fit traditional educational molds. Okay, she said, pulling up a chair to face them. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to email your teachers and request meetings to discuss alternative learning approaches. Ethan, we're going to channel that arguing energy into debate club or student council, somewhere your questioning is an asset. Lily, we're going to experiment with different study methods until we find what clicks for you. And Sophie, we're going to tell your teachers that quiet doesn't mean uninvolved. They won't listen, Ethan said. But he leaned forward, interested despite himself. They'll listen when I point out that their job is to teach you, not mold you into cookie-cutter students. And if they don't listen, we'll escalate until someone does. You do that? Lily asked. Fight for us? That's literally my job. Well, part of it. The other part is apparently figuring out how to work that terrifying stove so we don't starve, Sophie giggled. You don't know how to cook? I know how to make exactly 3 things: scrambled eggs, grilled cheese, and spaghetti with jar sauce. Beyond that, I'm useless. We know how to cook, Lily said quietly. Mom taught us before. The room went silent. This was sacred ground, Julia realized. A connection to their mother they hadn't shared with any of the previous nannies. Would you teach me? Julia asked carefully. I'd really like to learn. The triplets exchanged glances, that wordless communication flowing between them. Okay, Ethan said finally. But you have to actually listen and do what we say. No adults thinking they know better. Deal. They descended on the kitchen like a small army, pulling out cutting boards, pots, ingredients Julia couldn't name. Sophie directed her to wash vegetables. Lily showed her how to properly mince garlic. You're doing it wrong. You have to use the flat of the knife first, and Ethan supervised the sauce, explaining the difference between simmering and boiling with the authority of a seasoned chef. Mom said cooking is about paying attention, Sophie explained, guiding Julia's hands as they chopped tomatoes. You have to notice when things change. When the garlic smells nutty instead of raw. When the sauce starts to thicken, it's chemistry, Ethan added, stirring the pot with practiced ease. Precise measurements matter, but so does intuition. And it's love, Lily finished, adding fresh basil to the mix. Mom said you can taste whether someone cared when they made the food. They worked together in a rhythm that spoke of hours spent in this kitchen before their world had shattered. Julia followed their instructions, watching them come alive in a way she hadn't seen before. Here they weren't defensive or hostile or testing. They were just kids sharing something precious. When they finally sat down to eat at the kitchen island instead of the formal dining room, the pasta was the best Julia had ever tasted. Not because of any sophisticated technique, but because it was made with hands that remembered love. "This is really good," she said honestly. "Thank you for teaching me." "You're not terrible at taking direction," Ethan admitted grudgingly. "For an adult, high praise," Julia said with a smile. "Julia." Sophie's voice was small. "When you fight with our teachers, you won't give up, right? Even if they're really stubborn?" Julia met her eyes, then Lily's, then Ethan's. "I don't give up on people I care about. And I'm starting to care about you three quite a lot. Strike one if you're lying," Ethan warned, but there was no real threat in it, not a lie. A promise. That night, after the children were in bed, Julia sat in her room composing careful, professional emails to 3 teachers who were about to discover that these kids now had someone in their corner. Someone who wouldn't accept labels or limitations or lazy assessments. She was learning. Learning that strength came in small packages. Learning that grief made people do terrible things like throw away books. Learning that sometimes the best thing you could do for broken children was simply refuse to see them as broken. The trials were just beginning. But so was the transformation, and Julia was finally starting to believe she might actually be capable of this after all. Julia had been with the Westbrook family for 3 weeks when everything fell apart. It started with a phone call she wasn't supposed to overhear. She'd come downstairs early before the children woke to practice the pancake recipe Lily had taught her. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, and Margaret's voice drifted through, tight with frustration. "Mr. Westbrook, I understand your schedule is demanding, but the parent-teacher conferences are mandatory. The school has made that explicitly clear." A pause. "No, sending me with your signature on a form is not the same as attending. Your children need—" Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, sir. I'll inform them." Julia heard the sharp click of a phone being set down too hard. She pushed through the door. Margaret stood with her back to the counter, her usual composure cracked around the edges. "He's not coming," Julia said. It wasn't a question. Margaret's jaw tightened. "Mr. Westbrook will be extending his trip to London. He won't return until after the conferences conclude. He's authorized me to attend in his place and has given approval for any necessary accommodations the school recommends." The kids asked if he'd be there. "They've been talking about it all week." "I'm aware." Margaret's voice carried years of disappointment carefully managed. "This is not the first important event he's missed, Miss Hayes. It won't be the last." Julia felt anger bloom hot in her chest. "They're going to be devastated. They're accustomed to disappointment where their father is concerned. They'll survive. Surviving isn't the same as thriving," Julia shot back. "They shouldn't have to get used to being abandoned." Margaret's eyes sharpened. "Mind your tone. You've been here 3 weeks. I've been managing this household for 8 years. I understand these children's reality far better than you do. Then why aren't you angrier about this?" The question hung between them. Margaret's expression shifted, something raw breaking through her professional mask. "Because anger changes nothing," she said quietly. "Richard Westbrook is who he is. A man who builds empires but cannot be in the same room as his own grief. A man who works 90-hour weeks so he doesn't have to come home to a house full of ghosts. Getting angry at him is like getting angry at the weather. Pointless." so we just accept it. Tell 3 kids their father is too busy for them again, and watch them pretend it doesn't hurt? What would you suggest instead? You cannot force a man to be a father, Julia. Believe me, I've tried. Julia paced the kitchen, her mind racing. What if we don't tell them yet? What if we wait until the last possible moment? You want to give them false hope? I want to give them a chance to not dread this for the next 5 days. They're already anxious about the conferences. Why add his absence to that pile? Margaret considered this, then shook her head. Secrets have a way of causing more damage than truth. They need to know, but Julia couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be another way. The children noticed something was wrong at breakfast. Julia had burned the pancakes, too distracted to pay attention, and her usual easy conversation felt forced. What's going on? Ethan asked, pushing his barely touched plate away. You're being weird. I'm not being weird. These pancakes are weird. I think I added salt instead of sugar. You're lying. Sophie's voice was flat, accusing. Rule number 1. No lying. Julia set down her spatula, her heart sinking. They were too perceptive, these kids. Too used to reading adults for signs of incoming pain. You're right. I'm sorry. She sat down at the kitchen island with them. I'm trying to figure out how to tell you something you're not going to want to hear. The triplets went very still, their faces closing off in identical expressions of braced disappointment. Dad's not coming to the conferences, Lily said. Not a question. A certainty. How did you... He never comes. Ethan's voice was carefully neutral, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his fork. Why would this time be different? We knew anyway, Sophie added. We just hoped maybe... But we knew. Julia wanted to argue, to tell them their father loved them, that he wanted to be there. But she'd promised no lies, and she didn't actually know if those things were true. She'd never even met Richard Westbrook. I'm sorry, she said instead. You deserve better than this. Whatever. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. It doesn't matter. We don't need him there anyway. He left before Julia could respond. Lily followed, silent tears streaming down her face. Sophie lingered a moment longer. The other nannies always made excuses for him, she said quietly. They'd say he was important, that his work mattered, that we should be proud. Thank you for not doing that. Then she was gone too, and Julia sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by ruined pancakes and the wreckage of 3 small hearts breaking in slow motion. The next few days were difficult. The triplets retreated into themselves, their earlier progress seeming to evaporate. They were polite, but distant, going through the motions of their routines without real engagement. Julia tried everything, cooking together, movie nights, even suggesting they could skip homework for a day. But nothing reached them. The night before the conferences, Julia found Lily in the playroom at midnight, surrounded by her schoolwork. Tears dripping onto math problems she'd attempted and erased dozens of times. Hey, Julia said softly, sitting down beside her. It's really late. You should be sleeping. I can't get it. Lily's voice was thick with exhaustion and frustration. I've been trying for 3 hours and I still can't get it. And tomorrow the teachers are going to tell Margaret how stupid I am, and it won't even matter because Dad won't be there to hear it anyway. You're not stupid. Lily, we've talked about this. Then why can't I do simple multiplication? Why does everyone else in my class understand this and I don't? Why's everything so hard for me? Julia looked at the paper. The problems weren't simple. They were multi-step word problems that required abstract thinking and number manipulation. For a kid who'd already said she needed to learn differently, this approach was setting her up to fail. Can I show you something? Julia pulled out her phone and opened the calculator app. Math isn't about memorizing. It's about understanding patterns and relationships. Let's break this down differently. She spent the next hour working with Lily, using physical objects, pennies, buttons, anything they could count and group. Slowly, Lily's expression shifted from defeated to curious to triumphant as concepts began to click. I got it, she exclaimed as she solved a problem independently. I actually got it. See, not stupid. Just learning in a way your teachers haven't figured out how to support yet. Lily threw her arms around Julia, squeezing tight. Will you tell them tomorrow? At the conference? Will you explain that I'm not stupid? I just need different help? Julia's stomach dropped. She'd been planning to attend the conferences with Margaret, but in a supporting role. Now Lily was looking at her with such hope, such trust. I'll tell them, Julia promised. I'll make sure they understand. And you'll be there the whole time? You won't let Margaret just agree with everything they say? I'll be there. The parent-teacher conferences were held in Ashford Academy's administration building, a neo-Gothic structure that screamed old money and older traditions. Julia felt distinctly out of place in her simple dress and cardigan, surrounded by mothers in designer suits and fathers checking their phones between sessions. Margaret navigated the hallways with practiced ease, her tablet ready to take notes, her demeanor professional and slightly cold. Julia followed, her heart pounding. Ethan's teacher, Mr. Harrison, was a stern man in his 50s who launched into his assessment before they'd even fully sat down. Ethan is a bright student, but his behavior is increasingly problematic. He questions everything, argues with my teaching methods, and influences other students to do the same. I'm recommending a behavioral evaluation and possible medication for oppositional defiant disorder. Julia felt her blood pressure spike. Or, she said before Margaret could respond with diplomatic acceptance, Ethan is intellectually curious and needs to be challenged rather than controlled. Mr. Harrison's eyebrows rose. I'm sorry, who are you? Julia Hayes. I'm Ethan's caregiver, and I've spent the last 3 weeks with him. He's not defiant. He's engaged. He asks questions because he actually cares about understanding, not just passing tests. Miss Hayes, Margaret said quietly, a warning in her tone, but Julia couldn't stop. All the frustration of the past week, all the anger at Richard Westbrook's absence, all the protective fury she felt for these kids came pouring out. You want to medicate a 7-year-old for having opinions? For not being a passive recipient of whatever you say? That's not a disorder. That's called being smart and expecting adults to respect that intelligence. I don't think you understand how classroom management works. Mr. Harrison began. I understand that it's easier to label a challenging student than to challenge yourself as a teacher. Ethan needs debate club, advanced coursework, opportunities to lead discussions, not medication to make him more convenient for you. The meeting deteriorated from there. Mr. Harrison insisted on his assessment. Julia insisted on her observations. Margaret sat silent, her expression unreadable. The pattern repeated with Lily's teacher, who Julia confronted about learning accommodations, and Sophie's teacher, who Julia challenged about equating quietness with anxiety. By the third meeting, Margaret pulled her aside in the hallway. What are you doing? She hissed. I'm advocating for them. Like I promised. You're making enemies of their teachers. You're undermining my authority, and you're operating from 3 weeks of experience while dismissing educators with years of training. Those educators want to medicate, diagnose, and fix children who aren't broken. I'm not going to smile and nod while they pathologize normal responses to trauma. Margaret's expression hardened. You think you're helping, but you're making everything harder. These teachers have power over the children's academic futures. Antagonizing them serves no one. Neither does letting them steamroll kids who can't advocate for themselves. They stared at each other, at an impasse. I'm calling Mr. Westbrook, Margaret said finally. This is beyond my authority to handle. Julia's heart sank. She'd overstepped. She'd let her emotions override her judgment. She'd probably just cost herself this job. That evening she sat with the triplets in the playroom, knowing this might be one of their last nights together. How did it go? Sophie asked tentatively. Julia took a breath. I fought for you. Maybe too hard. I might have made things worse. What do you mean? Ethan's eyes were wide. I disagreed with your teachers, loudly, and Margaret is calling your father because I overstepped. Her voice caught. I might have to leave. The silence was deafening. Then Lily spoke, her voice fierce. No, you can't leave. You promised. I don't want to, sweetie, but you fought for us, Ethan interrupted. Nobody's ever done that before. Nobody's ever told the teachers they were wrong about us. You saw us, Sophie whispered. really saw us. Not who they want us to be, who we actually are. Julia pulled all three of them close, her eyes burning with unshed tears. No matter what happens, she said, I want you to know that these 3 weeks have mattered. You've mattered. And I'm so proud to know you. They clung to each other as the sun set outside the windows. 4 people who'd found each other in the wreckage and weren't ready to let go. But sometimes, holding on wasn't enough. Sometimes the obstacles were bigger than hope. Julia woke at dawn to find all 3 triplets standing beside her bed, still in their pajamas, eyes wide with determination. She bolted upright, heart racing. What's wrong? Is everyone okay? We need to talk to Dad, Ethan announced. And before Margaret does, Julia glanced at her phone. 5:30 in the morning. He's in London. It's almost lunchtime there. He's probably in meetings. We know his schedule, Lily interrupted, holding up a tablet that displayed a complex calendar system. He has a 15-minute window between his investor call and his lunch with the Prime Minister's trade delegation. That's at 6 a.m. our time. We have 25 minutes. How do you... Julia started, then shook her head. Never mind. What exactly are you planning to say? That you're the first person who's ever actually been on our side, Sophie said quietly. And if he fires you, we're going on strike. Strike from what? Everything, Ethan said with grim satisfaction. School, eating, talking, cooperation of any kind. We'll make the last 17 nannies look like a warm-up act. Julia's chest tightened with equal parts terror and fierce pride. You can't blackmail your father into keeping me. Watch us, Lily said. 20 minutes later, they were all crammed into Margaret's office, the only room with video conferencing equipment, waiting for Richard Westbrook to accept their call. Julia had tried to talk them out of this, but the triplets were immovable. Margaret had appeared in the doorway, clearly awakened by the unusual activity, but had simply observed in silence. The screen flickered to life. Richard Westbrook looked exactly like his portrait in the hallway, but older, more tired. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of face that had spent years learning not to show weakness. He was in what appeared to be a hotel room, London visible through the windows behind him. This is unexpected, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Margaret, I thought we were scheduled to speak this afternoon. This call was the children's initiative. Sir, Margaret said from her position by the door. His gaze moved to the triplets, and something flickered across his face too quickly for Julia to identify. Ethan, Lily, Sophie, is something wrong? You're going to fire Julia, Ethan said bluntly. We want you to know that's a mistake. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. I wasn't aware I'd made that decision yet. Margaret simply informed me there was an incident at your school conferences that required discussion. She stood up for us. Lily jumped in. The teachers wanted to put Ethan on medication and label me as learning disabled and send Sophie to therapy for being quiet, and Julia told them they were wrong. She fought for us when nobody else would, Sophie added, her voice gaining strength. Not even Margaret, not even you. The last 2 words landed like stones in still water. Richard's expression went carefully blank. I see, he said after a long pause. And Julia is... Right here, Julia said, unable to stay silent any longer. Julia Hayes, sir. I'm sorry for the unorthodox introduction. The children wanted to speak with you before any decisions were made about my employment. Richard studied her through the screen, his gaze analytical, measuring. You've been with my family for 3 weeks, and you've already created enough chaos to warrant an international phone call at 6 in the morning. That's either remarkably impressive or deeply concerning. Probably both, Julia admitted. I overstepped at the conferences. I let my emotions override professional boundaries. But I don't regret advocating for your children, sir. They needed someone to do it, and you decided that someone should be you, a 23-year-old with no childcare credentials. The word should have stung, but Julia met his gaze steadily. The 17 credentialed nannies before me quit rather than actually engage with your children's real needs. Sometimes credentials matter less than actually caring. Dad, Ethan interrupted, if you fire Julia, we quit too. Quit what exactly? Everything. We'll stop going to school. We'll refuse every nanny you hire after her. We'll make your life so complicated that you'll have to actually come home and deal with us yourself." Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That sounds like a threat, Ethan." "It's a promise," Lily said. "We're tired of people who just go through the motions. Julia actually sees us. She actually cares. If you take that away, we have nothing left to lose." The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and charged. Julia could see Margaret's reflection in the window, her expression unreadable. Finally, Richard spoke, and his voice was quieter than before. "When your mother was alive, she used to call me out when I was being," her words, "an absent-minded workaholic. She'd tell me that building companies was meaningless if I wasn't building relationships with my own children." He paused, something raw crossing his face. "I haven't heard anyone challenge me like that since she died. It's been easier to surround myself with people who simply manage problems rather than confronting me with them." "Sir," Margaret began, but he held up a hand. "I'm not firing Ms. Hayes," he said, looking directly at Julia through the screen. "But I am going to cut my London trip short and return home this weekend. I think it's time I actually met the person my children are willing to go to war for." The triplets erupted in surprised chatter, but Julia's stomach dropped. Meeting Richard Westbrook in person felt infinitely more terrifying than this video call. "In the meantime," Richard continued, "Margaret, please schedule a follow-up meeting with the school administration. I'll attend personally. If there are concerns about my children's education, I want to hear them directly, and I want to hear Julia's perspective as well." After the call ended, the triplets celebrated with whooping enthusiasm, dancing around Margaret's office. Margaret herself approached Julia with an expression that might have been the tiniest hint of approval. "You're either very brave or very foolish," she said quietly. "Possibly both. But you got him to come home. That's something I haven't managed in 2 years." Over the next few days, something shifted in the household. The triplets, empowered by their successful intervention, began to open up in ways Julia hadn't seen before. Ethan started a journal where he wrote down all his questions and arguments, then shared them with Julia each evening. They'd debate philosophy, science, ethics, anything that caught his interest. His aggressive edge softened into passionate intellectual curiosity when he had someone who engaged rather than shut him down. Lily asked Julia to help her create study materials that worked for her learning style. They made flashcards with colors and patterns, turned math problems into physical puzzles, recorded Lily explaining concepts in her own words so she could listen back. Slowly, painstakingly, Lily began to believe she wasn't stupid, just different, and Sophie started drawing again. Not the tight, controlled sketches from before, but expansive, emotional pieces that filled entire poster boards. She drew her mother in the garden, reading books, laughing. She drew the family they used to be, and when she showed Julia, her eyes were both sad and relieved, like she'd been holding her breath for 2 years and could finally exhale. "Dad doesn't like it when we talk about her," Sophie confided, as they worked side by side one afternoon. Julia attempting her own clumsy drawing, while Sophie created something beautiful. "He changes the subject or leaves the room, so we stopped mentioning her around him. But that made it feel like she never existed." "She existed," Julia said firmly. "She was real and she loved you, and you're allowed to remember her always." "Do you think Dad will be mad that we've been talking about her with you?" Julia considered this carefully. "I think your dad is sad. And sometimes people handle sadness by trying to run from it. But that doesn't mean you have to run too." The day before Richard's scheduled return, Julia received an email from Ashford Academy. The school had agreed to implement individualized learning plans for all 3 children, would remove the medication recommendation from Ethan's file, and wanted to schedule a meeting with both Mr. Westbrook and Julia to discuss ongoing support strategies. It was a complete reversal from the conferences. Julia suspected Richard Westbrook's name carried weight that her arguments alone hadn't. But she'd take the win regardless. That evening, she helped the triplets prepare for their father's homecoming. They decided to cook dinner, the pasta dish they'd taught Julia, with some additions they'd been practicing. The kitchen became a flurry of activity, sauce simmering, bread baking, 3 small chefs directing Julia with increasing confidence. "Do you think he'll actually stay?" Lily asked, kneading dough with practiced hands. "Or will he just show up for one dinner and leave again?" "I don't know," Julia answered honestly, "but I think he's trying. And maybe that's a start." "Mom used to say that trying was the hardest part," Sophie said softly. "That once you start trying, the rest gets easier. Your mom sounds like she was very wise." She was. Ethan's voice was thick with emotion he was trying to hide. "She would have liked you, I think. You're kind of like her, not in looks or anything, but in the way you make us feel like we matter." Julia had to blink back tears. "You do matter. So much." That night, after the children were asleep, Julia stood in her small room, looking out at the garden below. In the morning, Richard Westbrook would arrive and everything might change again. He might decide she was too young, too inexperienced, too emotionally involved. He might bring in someone more qualified, more professional, more appropriate for children of his status. But she'd given these kids something real. She'd fought for them, stood up for them, helped them believe in themselves again. Whatever happened next, that couldn't be taken away. Her phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. "Mr. Westbrook's flight lands at 9 a.m. He'll arrive at the house by 11. The children have requested you be present for his welcome home." "I agreed. Don't make me regret it." Julia smiled despite her nerves. She texted back, "I'll do my best." Another message came through, this time from an unknown number. "Ms. Hayes, this is Richard Westbrook. My children speak very highly of you. I'm looking forward to meeting the woman who managed what 17 others could not. Thank you for caring about them. We'll speak soon." Julia read the message 3 times, her heart pounding. Gratitude, respect, acknowledgement, maybe, just maybe. This broken family was starting to remember how to be whole. The breakthrough had happened. Now came the real test, sustaining it. Richard Westbrook arrived exactly at 11. His town car pulling up to the mansion with the kind of precision that suggested a man who controlled every detail of his life. Julia watched from the upstairs window as he emerged. Tall, imposing in his tailored suit, even after an overnight flight. The triplets waited in the foyer with Margaret, dressed in their best clothes. Nervous energy radiating from their small bodies. She'd been instructed to stay upstairs initially, to give the family time to reunite privately. But she could hear everything from her position at the top of the stairs. "Hello, children." Richard's voice was formal, awkward. "You all look well. Hi, Dad." 3 voices in near unison, equally uncertain. A long pause. Julia could imagine them standing there, this father and his children, separated by grief and time, and not knowing how to bridge the distance. "I understand you've prepared dinner," Richard said finally. "That was thoughtful." "Julia helped," Lily offered. "But we did most of it. We wanted to show you what Mom taught us." Another pause, this one heavier. "I see. Well, I look forward to it." The conversation limped along for another few painful minutes before Margaret intervened, suggesting the children might want to show their father their recent schoolwork. Julia heard footsteps retreating toward the study, and she released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. This was going to be harder than she'd thought. An hour later, Margaret summoned Julia to Richard's office. She descended the stairs with her heart hammering, smoothing her simple dress, wishing she looked more professional, more capable, more like someone who belonged in this world. Richard stood when she entered, which surprised her. Up close, she could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. This was a man running on fumes and willpower. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for joining me." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. "Please sit." Julia sat, forcing herself to maintain eye contact, even though every instinct screamed to look away from his intense scrutiny. "My children staged what amounts to an intervention on your behalf," he began, a hint of something that might have been amusement in his voice. "That's a first in my experience. I'm curious what you've done in 3 weeks to inspire such loyalty." "I listened to them," Julia said simply. I saw them as people instead of problems to manage. Margaret says you overstepped significantly at their school conferences, that you challenged their teachers' professional assessments and created conflict where diplomacy would have served better. Julia's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice steady. I did. I won't apologize for that, Mr. Westbrook. Those teachers wanted to medicate your son for being intelligent, label your daughter as disabled for learning differently, and pathologize your other daughter for being introverted. I couldn't sit quietly while they tried to fix children who aren't broken, and you determined this based on 3 weeks of observation. I determined this based on 3 weeks of actually paying attention. Your children are brilliant, resilient, and capable. They're also grieving and neglected and desperate for someone to genuinely care about them. The teachers only saw behavior problems. I saw children crying out for help. The words came out harsher than she'd intended. Richard's expression hardened. Neglected? His voice went cold. I provide them with everything. The best school, the best home, the best opportunities money can buy. Everything except you, Julia said, and immediately regretted it. I'm sorry, that was true. Richard stood, walking to the window, his back to her. Don't apologize for honesty, Ms. Hayes. It's refreshing, if uncomfortable. He was silent for a long moment. My wife died 2 years ago. Car accident. Sudden, senseless. One moment she was here and the next. He stopped, his shoulders rigid. I didn't know how to be a father without her. She was the heart of this family. I was just the provider. When she died, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I provided more. More money, more opportunities, more things. But not more of myself. Julia's anger dissolved into something softer, sadder. They don't need more things, Mr. Westbrook. They need you. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I see them and I see her. Every mannerism, every expression. Lily has her laugh. Sophie has her gentle nature. Ethan has her fierce spirit. Being around them is like living with ghosts. So I run, I work, I stay away. And I tell myself it's because I'm building their future. But really, I'm just avoiding my present. What changed? Julia asked quietly. Why come home now? He turned to face her, and she was startled to see moisture in his eyes. Because my 7-year-old son told me that if I fired you, he'd give up on me entirely. Because my daughters were willing to wage war to protect someone who'd been in their lives for less than a month. Because I realized that if my children would fight that hard for a stranger who showed them kindness, what did that say about their own father? Julia didn't know what to say to that. The rawness of his confession left her speechless. I want to try, Richard continued. I want to be present, but I don't know how anymore. I don't know how to talk to them, how to comfort them, how to be what they need. Maybe start by having dinner with them tonight, Julia suggested gently. Let them show you what they've learned. Ask them about their lives. Be interested, not just present. Richard nodded slowly. Will you be there? At dinner, if you want me to be. I think they'd want you to be. And frankly, I could use someone who knows how to actually connect with them. He returned to his desk, some of his formal composure sliding back into place. The school has agreed to a meeting next week. I'd like you to attend as well. Margaret will join us, but I want your perspective included in any decisions about the children's education. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Miss Hayes. This is an experiment. I'm trusting you with my children based on very little evidence beyond their word. Don't make me regret it. The dinner that evening was both beautiful and heartbreaking. The triplets had set the dining room table with care. Candles, cloth napkins, the good china that probably hadn't been used since their mother died. The pasta was perfect, the bread golden and warm, the salad crisp and fresh, but the conversation was stilted, painful. Richard asked questions that felt rehearsed. The children answered in monosyllables, their earlier enthusiasm dampened by their father's obvious discomfort. Julia tried to facilitate, to bridge the gaps, but it felt like trying to hold water in her hands. Halfway through the meal, Sophie started crying. Quiet tears that she tried to hide, but everyone noticed. Sophie? Richard's voice was uncertain. What's wrong? This was Mom's recipe, Sophie whispered. We made it exactly the way she taught us. But it doesn't taste the same without her here. Nothing does. The silence that followed was devastating. Richard's face went pale, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Ethan stared at his plate, jaw clenched. Lily reached for Sophie's hand. "I know," Richard said finally, his voice rough. "I know it doesn't. I'm sorry. Why did you get rid of her things?" Ethan asked suddenly, anger breaking through. "Her books, her clothes, her pictures. You erased her like she never existed." "I didn't erase her. I couldn't bear to—" Richard stopped, struggling. Seeing her things everywhere, it was like losing her over and over again every day. But we needed those things. Lily's voice rose, unusual for her. "We needed to remember her. You took away everything that made her real." "I was trying to move forward," Richard said helplessly. "You were trying to run away," Ethan shot back. "Just like you're always running, to London, to Tokyo, to anywhere that isn't here with us. That's not fair." "Yes, it is." Ethan stood, his chair scraping back. "You left us alone with strangers. 17 strangers who all quit because we're too broken and too difficult and too much work. And the only reason you're here now is because we threatened to make your life harder. You didn't come back because you missed us. You came back because we cornered you." The words detonated in the quiet dining room. Richard looked stricken, speechless. The triplets were all crying now, years of buried pain erupting. Julia felt her own eyes burning. This was the darkest moment, when all the wounds were exposed, when the truth was too raw to ignore, when healing felt impossible. "You're right," Richard said finally, his voice breaking completely. "You're absolutely right. I've been a coward. I've been a terrible father. I lost your mother, and instead of holding you closer, I pushed you away because I didn't know how to be enough for you on my own." He stood, moving around the table to kneel beside his children, making himself smaller, bringing himself to their level. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, tears streaming down his face now too. "I don't know how to be both parents. I don't know how to fill the hole she left. But I want to try. If you'll let me, I want to try." Ethan was the first to move, throwing himself at his father with all the force of 2 years of grief. Lily and Sophie followed, and suddenly Richard was on the floor, surrounded by his sobbing children, all of them breaking open together. Julia stood quietly, tears running down her own cheeks, and slipped from the room to give them privacy. She found Margaret in the hallway, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I've waited 2 years for this," Margaret said softly. "For them to finally say what needed to be said. For him to finally hear it. What happens now?" Julia asked. "Now comes the hard part. The staying. The showing up. The doing the work even when it's painful." Margaret looked at her, really looked at her. "You did this, you know. You cared enough to break through their walls. And in breaking through theirs, you broke through his." Julia shook her head. "I just loved them. That's all. That's everything," Margaret corrected. Later that night, Julia sat in her room, emotionally exhausted. Her phone showed a text from the Triplets group chat. They'd added her to it the previous week. "Ethan, Dad's staying for 2 weeks. Working from home." Lily, "He said he's cancelling his Hong Kong trip." Sophie, "He asked if we could put Mom's photos back up. Together." Ethan, "It still hurts, but maybe different now." Lily, "Thank you, Julia." Sophie, Julia smiled through fresh tears, typing back, "So proud of all of you. Sleep well." Another message came through, this one from Richard Westbrook. "What happened tonight was necessary and long overdue. My children were brave enough to tell me the truth because you taught them their feelings mattered. I'm grateful, terrified, and determined not to waste this chance. Thank you for giving me my family back." Julia set her phone aside and looked out at the moonlit garden. They'd walked through the darkest moment and emerged on the other side. Broken, yes. Bleeding, definitely. But finally honest, and from honesty came the possibility of healing. The transformation was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.